Okay, I'd like to just start out by welcoming you to the first forum of 2019. And I'll introduce Natalie in a second. I first want to go over announcements. Does anyone here have an announcement? Because I have a lot of them. And January is a terrible month. It's the busiest month of the year, and I'm going to tell you why it is. But anyway, I do want to mention that our next speaker in February will be Dr. Larry McClellan, and he'll be speaking about the filling the underground gap and of the Underground Railroad activities between Chicago and Michigan City. And a lot is known, excuse me, a lot is known about the slaves moving northward from south of Indiana and south of Illinois, northward. But no one, or there's very little information about how the slaves moved from Chicago and the Chicago area to Michigan City and then beyond to Detroit. And so that will be the focus of his talk on Tuesday, February 5th. Ollie has its annual membership meeting coming up January 17th, Thursday evening. And if anyone's interested in becoming a member, there's information on the table here. 2 days later, January 19th, it will be the 18th annual Winter Wonderland at Wolf Lake Festival. And we had scheduled other activities, but we've decided to revise the agenda, and we'll be speaking, discussing at least for a couple hours the information about the mute swans that have been
the ones that died.
Ones that died, and I think there's more than 30. One of the problems is that we can't get enough. There really isn't a good source of information yet that's available, at least to me. So, for example, I just found out that 2 swans died on the Illinois side of Wolf Lake. I'm trying to find out if there were any on the Indiana side of Wolf Lake, but most of them are kind of on the northeast part of George Lake, the northern half. But we want to find out. We want people to come there so we can kind of gather as much information as we can, and then once you get the information, then you can discuss what to do about it. And that will be on Saturday, January 19th.
I should have gotten them.
We have our Board of Directors meeting on January 25th. And then the final announcements I want to make is about the upcoming, we got a grant, $5,000 grant, and we were told we could use it for whatever project we wanted to. So we're going to publish our 20-year history of Ollie over the line. Most of it's been written, but I'm going to have to streamline the book. I'm going to reduce it from 17 chapters to 9 chapters and other things that we'll have to do. But hopefully we can get it published by mid-year. And I'm really excited about that. That's going to take a lot of time.
Do you hear everyone congratulating you on that?
Oh, I don't know. I know I have some people that I've appealed to, to come in as a third party. So to comment on. Valerie, actually,
Yes, I've read the draft
You
and
read-
I'd be happy to look again.
okay, we're going to revise it, Valerie, and then we'll see if we could make it more exciting than your first trip to it. And that's it. The other thing, I just had Dave Dolak just walked in, and I had this information on the. We were talking about the.
The
art-
geologic study.
Yeah, geologic study.
Thank you.
Do you have a copy of that?
Not of this, no, I saw
Okay.
it online, I didn't print it.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want to keep it,
I'd like to have a hard copy, I wanted to talk to this artist
okay.
about some stuff I can do at Columbia.
Okay, but don't lose it in
Oh.
case I want it back. I'll email you. But I don't think I have. I just ran across it over the break, so I saved it for you.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. And now the speaker. Natalie has been working on water quality efforts and environmental community outreach for over 13 years. And the last time I ran into her was at Calumet, Purdue Calumet 2 years ago, or more than 2 years ago. Before she became executive director of Save the Dunes. And this January 3rd was your second anniversary, or your first?
Second anniversary.
Your second anniversary, okay. And then she has a great enthusiasm for developing and implementing important projects that protect and promote our area lands and waters, all while engaging our Northwest Indiana residents. Natalie holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She also holds a Master of Science in Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences from the University of Illinois, Champaign, Urbana-Champaign. She is an active member of the Northwest Indiana Paddling Association. We had Dan here a couple months ago. And she's an advisor to the Citizens Advisory for the Remediation of the Environment, a governing member of the Healing Our Waters Coalition, and some other activities which they don't specify. When Natalie is not outside hiking or kayaking, you might find her volunteering for animal rescue groups or assisting 4-H with poultry projects.
Oh yes, I'm the chicken lady.
Okay. So now we're finding out what this other stuff is. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. So January 3rd, yes, I just celebrated my second year anniversary, 2 years of being executive director for Save the Dunes. I made it that far so far. Okay. Friday, I turned 33 years old. It's safe to say I'm a young pup, maybe the next generation. And I will say that I'm probably one of the middle-aged people in my office, meaning there are people younger in my office. So really, Save the Dunes is now got this next generation cultivated and jumping in and giving it their all to do everything to protect these places we hold dear. And I'm just thrilled to be part of it. Yes, when I'm not judging chickens, I am working on the environment. And oh yes, I am Lake County's poultry judge for 4-H. And LaPorte County and Stark County and a few other counties. But my true passion, of course, is the environment. And I will never forget being a camper at a nature camp. And it was 5th grade that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to work on being outdoors, protecting it, protecting all the critters that live in the water and on the land, and being very enthusiastic about it and sharing that enthusiasm with others. And in my role as Save the Dunes Executive Director, by gosh, it's my 5th grade dream come true. So I'm inspired by that And I love that I can come out and talk about what the organization's doing and hopefully give you some inspiration today as well. So what is Save the Dunes? I think most of us are familiar with this, but just taking a look at the mission, well, Save the Dunes is all about preserving, protecting, and restoring the Indiana dunes and all natural resources in Northwest Indiana's Lake Michigan watershed for an enhanced quality of life. So we're not talking just about the dunes proper. We do work all the way Long Beach, Michigan City, down to Valparaiso and Maryville, and all the way out to Wolf Lake. We do this whole area. Often we focus our efforts most focused on the dunes proper, but we all know that anywhere the water's running and entering Lake Michigan, it's all going downstream, it's all flowing to the dunes, it's all impacting those resources, so we have to look at that bigger picture. And that big picture, that ecosystem that we have here, is something quite special. It gives us these points, these quality of life factors, such as the economic boost. We have science here, education opportunities that you can't find anywhere else. Ecological, just blows my mind. We are really the epicenter for some wonderful things that you can't find anywhere else in the world. And of course, we have some amazing recreational benefits to boot. I like to think that we're the whole shebang. The Indiana Dunes, Northwest Indiana, this whole ecosystem. And we have to always step back and marvel about the fact of how it was even created. So that means everybody close your eyes and pretend we're back 13,000 years ago. No, I'm kidding. That's way too far back. I mean, yes, we can think about it, but don't close your eyes and think about 13,000 years ago. That's too hard. 13,000 years ago is when we can say that the Indiana Dunes was really starting to form. You know, the sands were moving. We had all these different kinds of habitats that came from the Wisconsin Glacier retreating. As that glacier moved, we ended up with forests and prairies, savannas, wetlands, pans, which are a very sensitive wetland system, boreal forests. Basically, all of the successional stages of dunes, how one habitat shifts and kind of turns into this next habitat, we have them all side by side by side by side. It's a unique juxtaposition that, again, we don't have anywhere else. And it's all because of that glacier. So yes, 14,000 years ago, as it retreated, it left those dune and swales. We saw the ridges of what used to be the old Lake Michigan bed. We see things like Coles Bog and Pinhook Bog, which are actually remnants of the glacier melting and that water still standing in those areas. And so, from an ecological perspective, we truly are a haven with a mosaic that I don't even know if any painter could do justice, painting the different habitats that we have here. And this is something, if you see a slide that you want me to come back to, I'm happy to do so. Well, because of all of this unique landscape, everything that's been here, because of the glacier moving, we have, of course, this natural laboratory. And Dr. Henry Coles, he made his theory of succession right here about how things progress over time and habitats transition. So really for over 100 years, this region, the Indiana Dunes, has been this place to study ecology, to study these habitats, because again, you have them all next to each other. Why travel to the ends of the earth when they're in your own backyard? And what are some of those things? What makes it so special with all those different habitats? Well, first off, the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore in all of the national park systems is the 4th in biodiversity. And that's pretty incredible if you think about the national park systems and what's out there, Yosemite and glacier and that, but we're up there as far as how many different plant species, especially, because there's over 1,400 of them. And I think that number still continues to grow. We have federally endangered species such as the Massasauga rattlesnake, Indiana bat, the Karner blue, a question mark there, which I will come back to. But Karner blue, of course, the butterfly that we normally associate with the Indiana dunes, something it's been here. We have more than 30% of Indiana's rare, threatened, and endangered species right in this region. We have magnificent migratory pathways where you see the sandhill cranes stopping in. All those birds that are taking their journey, they're using this as their safe haven, their stopover to feed, to rest. And then wouldn't you know, if you're really liking that, the flowers, more orchids than the state of Hawaii. Or Yellowstone, for that matter. So again, just wanted to bring it back of when we talk about, well, what are those landscapes giving? And this being such a center of study, well, that's just some of those reasons right there. Now, perhaps you're somebody who likes to get out in the dunes, get out and recreate. Raise your hand if you like to get outdoors. Of course, you're my people. The Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore was actually one of the first national park to be established as an urban park. That hadn't been done before, for something to be technically so urbanized in the 60s. So it's interesting that you have these beautiful landscapes nestled with the industry, nestled with communities that are right in the middle of it all, and finding this balance of being able to enjoy the resources and your own personal wilderness while also maybe not being in the wilderness at all. This is taken from the East Branch of the Little Calumet River, one of the newest and greatest places to kayak around here. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Out in Chesterton, Porter area. We are actually going to do a big event, I think in May and in June, and we'll rally people at St. Patrick's Church in Chesterton. And so that's especially the time that if you want other people there, because St. Pat's is a good place to put in, but rugged. And Shirley Hines Land Trust Woolmer Nature Preserve is another location too. We're seeing more and more of these canoe and kayak launches being placed in different areas. Save the Dunes, we're working with Shirley Hines Land Trust, the Paddling Association, the Park Service, the Dunes Learning Center, to get more of these places where people can recreate. And I'll elaborate on that as well. You know, other just types of recreation and things to celebrate. This whole water system, the Dunes Creek out at the state park, actually happened to flow in a pipe for the longest time underneath the parking lot that was there. And I was not here at that time, but I did hear the good story about a heavy, heavy rainfall that this creek flooded and collapsed part of the parking lot. Anybody remember that? Remember hearing about that? One of the projects that Save the Dunes worked with the Department of Natural Resources on is opening this up where people could jump and play and enjoy it without the threat of E. coli. I mean, daylighting a stream, giving it life. Of course, our National Park Service friends, every day is a great day to take a hike. And we love encouraging people to get outdoors, be it with a ranger, be it with another environmental organization. We all work together and we want people to experience this. And of course, the lake. I think Lake Michigan is one of the defining factors, other than the dunes themselves, of what makes this landscape just so amazing. And people recognize that back in time too. This is from 1913, a little grainy, but it is the Prairie Club taking their weekend walk. Okay? I'm just going to say, I think maybe we're not as risky these days. That's one heck of a walk. In a dress, no less. Yeah. And then even enjoying things like the 1917 Dunes pageant where people came out, they danced, they told stories, and even in the rain, people came out from all across Chicago and even beyond to listen to the stories, to watch the people dance and be almost this one with nature. So the science and ecology, the many recreational uses, that rich history, and the landscape itself that tells this story of 10,000 years of settlement, urbanization, and the rise of environmental conservation and restoration. We're in the heart of that. That's what Northwest Indiana is all about. And no wonder that's why I ended up here. You know, I wanted to move where things were happening. And when I heard stories like of, well, how the National Lakeshore and the protection of the dunes came to be, well, that certainly meant something to me, and I knew that I needed to be up here myself. You know, over 100 years, we've seen the dunes, the precious ecosystems that I've talked about, disappear. And it all happened so quickly. And this is something that I'm sure there's people in this room that certainly have much more knowledge of what was going on over this course of time. I only hear mostly about it in the books and the stories, that oral history. But it is something to note that even back in the early 1900s, people, just like you and me, residents, we realized that, yes, we need the industry. We very much need to grow and prosper and have that economic boost. But we also want those places where we want our families to live and to enjoy. And we saw that by taking a walk in the dunes landscape, that was something special, a recharge, our own quality of life factor that we weren't willing to let go. And so, in fact, in even 1916, Stephen Mather, who was the first director of the National Park Service, gathered over 400 attendees to talk about getting the Sand Dunes National Park established. That was in 1916. Word is that during these hearings, people actually picked the plants from the dunes. Now, don't do that. But back in 1916, they picked the plants from the dunes. They put them all on the walls, on the edges. People were wearing them almost like halos. It was a celebration. People were excited and very, very much wanted to see this preserved and protected as a national park. But then World War I got in the way. And of course, energy and efforts just needed to be focused elsewhere. And so that died for the moment. There was a group, the Indiana Preservation Council. It was a group that kind of had some starts and stops as far as getting together. They did have one member by the name of Bess Sheehan, and there is a lot of wonderful history of women in the dunes doing some amazing things, and she was one of them because Bess, as part of this group, said, if we can't get a park, let's do something through the state. And she was able to set aside, with her colleagues, the Indiana Dunes State Park. So, 1925, the first actual chunk of the dunes ecosystem that's really being protected and preserved right then and there. Whew, thank goodness. People knew, though, that they couldn't idly sit by. Things were still going to be moving forward, and we had to do something more. And Dorothy Buell, she just happened to be this English teacher. She was known for her wit and for her over-dramatization of things, her dramatical flair. And as the founder of Save the Dunes, I always like to think with I've been told I'm dramatic, that maybe that's something that she and I could have related to. On a whim, she heard about that Indiana Dunes Preservation Council getting together and doing a presentation, and she just said, she told her husband, let's go to it. Let's see what this is all about. She was so moved by what was going on that she wanted to get into the fight of preserving the rest of these lands and waters. And yet, the Dunes group at that time, the right people weren't there. Starts and stops, the group was starting to crumble. And so one of my favorite things that Dorothy said, you know what? Maybe women can do it. And that's exactly what she did. In 1952, in her home in Ogden Dunes, she gathered, we hear somewhere between 20 and 25, sometimes 21, but all women to sit down at the table and to form Save the Dunes Council. And with the mindset that, hey, we have got to do something in order to finish the preservation and protection that so many had set out and wanted before us. Because at that time, in the 50s, there were so many rumors running rampant. You know, industry coming in, the region was just starting to boom and to grow. Without necessarily that long foresight of, well, if we take this land and use it for this use, what does that mean? How is that going to impact the greater area? So the council was formed to basically educate and say, slow down. Let's think about what we could be missing if we start developing these areas. What happens then? It wasn't very long that Dorothy and company realized she needed to get political. And the politician that she went for, Paul Douglas. Because when she tried to talk to Illinois or Indiana wanted business. They saw a lot of that as stopping progress. And Illinois, Senator Paul Douglas understood that, hey, we've got to have these places where people can go, where people can celebrate nature. It's important. And he and Dorothy worked together and ended up talking to President Kennedy, Senator Douglas did, to convince him about something that was in the works right then and there, a port. That, you know, if you're going to do something as large as a port, the compromise is give us a park. And that's what happened. It was actually signed by Johnson in 1966, the authorizing legislation which set aside 8,330 acres of land to protect under the national park known as the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. Success. You know, I think if I was the Save the Dunes Council right then, it's like, my goodness. I always say to my colleagues, well, how do you beat that? That's impressive. They got their park. Of course, there was more land that needed to be done, to be brought into this, more threats crouching in on areas that were not yet protected. And so Save the Dunes worked with the Park Service and many, many other environmental organizations. This is certainly a partnership effort in which all people were needed to come together and make this happen. And much success in 76, 80, 86, and 1992 of increasing the park through subsequent bills to the size of 15,000 acres. It's huge. That's incredible. That's a story that, wow. And of course I love the fact that you had that go-getter woman that, believe it or not, at first men weren't even allowed to join Save the Dunes. She kept it just as all women. But eventually, not soon after, 1952, when it formed, there were over 1,000 Save the Dunes members across the country, all rallying behind, we need to save this place. Now, Paul Douglas, he, of course, played a huge hand in this, because if it wasn't for his political, connectivity, we may not have the land that we do today. And he said something, a quote, that still stands very, very true today. That the dunes really foreshadow the time not far removed when we shall, in all truth, be standing on that last unused, unprotected acre and be wondering which way to go.
And that is where we are today. We are down to the last unprotected acres. And what do we do with it?
And we know that there's a lot of constant threats, new threats, things that back in the 1900s, the early 1900s, people weren't thinking about. But we also know that history has a tendency to repeat itself. So organizations like Save the Dunes, we are still committed to making sure this landscape remains this, and that that very history of the dunes being moved and bulldozed down, that does not repeat itself. So those key challenges. What kind of things are the dunes facing today? Well, in the lakeshore and the state park, you have confusing boundaries. First off, that throws so many people off that there's a state park right smack dab in the middle of a national park. And if you look at the national park, you have communities like Beverly Shores and Ogden Dunes and Gary's Miller neighborhood. They're all just nestled right there in the middle. And then, of course, the different industries. So that's always confusing as far as it being fragmented. Inappropriate zoning. Just recently, we found out about a whole dune complex being bulldozed in Portage. And it was just because of the way it was zoned. And it was something that nobody even knew about. An error that, my goodness, you can't get that land back. Not exactly to the way that it was. And so, of course, that's a challenge. And then also trying to get the municipalities to understand what role they play in all this when they do make these decisions. When they're thinking about things like the expansion of the South Shore Railroad. Well, what's growth in Northwest Indiana going to look like as a result of that? And how do we find that sustainable balance of the jobs and the built infrastructure and nature? Of course, money, money, money. We've seen all kinds of budget cuts to some of our friends. I know our federal family right now really wants to go back to work. The National Park Service folks are just itching right now to get back into their positions. And already we're hearing things like Mount Baldy, people are they've broken off the caution tape and they're starting to go off into some of the sensitive areas. They're flying drones, all things that can disrupt a lot of progress being made. And so we need those essential people. We need these people. And cuts and things like that, it's certainly a challenge. Unwise development, it happens all the time. Lack of ownership of roads and parks. Well, because we have all these roads that intersect the national park, and we do. If you think of where a lot of the buybacks were happening within the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, those platted roads. Well, Beverly Shores and some of those other communities, they say, no, those roads still belong to us. And I think they get tax breaks off of it. Who really owns those roads? There is kind of that, who has that? Can we make a trail of it? Can we not? What can we do? Very confusing. Climate change. Don't get me started. Watersheds, anything again that's happening downstream, upstream, it's all connected, it's all flowing to Lake Michigan and to our dunes. Contamination, be it old or new. Degradation from invasive species, the bad species, be it plant or animal, that aren't supposed to be here and throw the whole ecosystem out of whack. Shoreline erosion, we see that at Portage Lakefront and Riverwalk when one of the big viewing platforms actually fell in during one of those storms not too long ago. Visitor impacts, just like those people climbing around Mount Baldy. Those things happen. People are still going off trail. They're still doing things. As much as we want people in the parks, you have to have people in the parks, but yet respecting the resources that are there. General lack of interest and care, that apathy. And then, of course, Indiana being ranked 4th worst in environmental quality. Ouch. Whew. That's tough, you know? Photos don't make me much happier, but think about it. Even though we need these industries, it's important. We can coexist. Things like spills. And there was one at the Portage Lakefront and Riverwalk that a lot of people heard about. Hexavalent chromium going into the water. Bad things happen. Legacy contamination. The Grand Calumet River. Before there were even things put in place by the EPA, before the EPA even existed, and you had different industries here that were regulating under no laws because they weren't required to. You still have that legacy of contamination that is in the soil, that is in the water. Our beaches can still be closed because of high E. coli, be it from failing septic systems, which actually are a tremendous problem in Northwest Indiana, or from combined sewer overflows. And that's when those discharges, they just get, treatment plant gets too full, can't manage all the water, can't manage the rainwater and the sewer water, so they just release partially untreated water into the nearest river or stream. Of course, our invasive species, Phragmites, my goodness, we can't go anywhere without seeing this plant around. And Phragmites and many of the invasive species create this monocultural environment where that's basically all you see is that one singular species and nothing more. Chokes out many of the other plant life and kills that biodiversity that we're known for. Asian carp, that's another threat. They're moving quickly, they eat a lot, a whole lot, and they're very close to getting into Lake Michigan. And then I mentioned population expansion. That's just what's to come. The red is actually development and what they're proposing. So it's tough. You know, when people say, well, didn't you already save the dunes? I get that a lot. You know, like, it's a park. You got parks. You got other managed lands. You got some awesome people out there like Shirley Hines Land Trust. You've got the Nature Conservancy. What do you got to do? Saving. There are still many different threats. The challenges that Dorothy and all the people of the Prairie Club and all those organizations that started and realized that we needed to protect this area. Some of the challenges are the same, and some of the challenges are ones that are just beyond their wildest dreams. And so really, as far as how Save the Dunes, how we do our work today, well, I think it changes each year. Each year, there's some new threat. Each year, there's some new role we can be playing. But I will say that everything that we do is in partnership, because it's something that we can't save this region alone. So I just want to make sure I point that out, especially if I say the we, I'm talking about so many hundreds of organizations that are really here making this place protected and doing an awesome job at it. I do want to talk a little bit about some of Save the Dunes specific projects, because there's a three-way strategy of how we approach saving the dunes today. First, one of the things we're probably best known for, our advocacy. We're still doing a lot of advocacy. It's certainly part of the puzzle and part of the strategy. Land and water stewardship. Sometimes it's land and water stewardship's been something Save the Dunes been doing a long time. It looks a little different these days because we're not trying to own as many parcels as we used to. Save the Dunes used to kind of function as a semi-land trust. Well, now there's lots of other organizations that are doing a fine job. So we often find ourselves acting as a land broker. We may get properties if we're in a good position to get them and to give them to the National Lakeshore to fill in their boundaries. We may get them and help get them to the Nature Conservancy or Shirley Hines Land Trust, or just making sure that it's protected.
the high quality areas that need it the most. And then that third arm of what we're doing to protect the dunes is, of course, meaningful outreach. The very thing that Dorothy Buell started off with, saying you have to have everybody engaged and really wanting this. No longer apathetic, but wanting this area to be saved. So, under the land and water stewardship, we often find ourselves doing a lot of planning. Now, I know planning may not sound that attractive and, they plan. Well, these are plans that don't just sit on the shelf. They're plans that we often, as Save the Dunes, staff and board, sit down and bring organizations together to develop a comprehensive strategy for managing lands when there are multiple landowners. In this case, Amber Flatwoods, Hoosier Prairie, and Moraine. These are 3 areas, protected areas. And you've got Hoosier Prairie over here, around the Griffith area. The Moraine here. And Amber Flatwoods. I was going to say, can I see it
It's
up
way
there?
up north.
It's all the way up there. Yeah, all the way up there. Whenever you have that many different kinds of managed lands, you know, everything needs some kind of plan of how you are going to treat the invasive species, how you are going to do burn regiments to make sure that these things are happening at the same time. Because if your neighbor's treating one property and taking the utmost care, but the management style of the person next to you maybe is different, that can get things out of sync. And you could suddenly be driving invasive plant species and filling the neighboring lands with Phragmites. It's something that we have to work together on. And so, Save the Dunes today, we find ourselves this convener position. We often act through the Indiana Dunes Ecosystem Alliance, where we gather everyone to the table, all the land managers, and say comprehensively, how do we build an action plan to manage these lands in an adaptive manner? And it's very interesting because this first one that we did just this year, I mean, like, it just, on the paper, just came out. You're talking about sitting people down from Shirley Hines, from the Lake County Park Board, the LaPorte County Park Board, and the Department of Natural Resources, because in these areas, they're all same, different owners. How do you get people to talk? How do you communicate across boundaries? We tend to be that convener, and good work gets produced from it, which I'm happy to pass this around, too. This is a picture of Moraine Valley, by the way, if you've never been there. Just a gorgeous place. That's managed by the Department of Natural Resources. So, some of the other things we have to do is to get the people hands-on. Once you get those kind of plans in place, you've got all the partners together. You have sought all the scientific information to ground this, to know what the best management strategies are. Sometimes you just need hands to manage the lands. And sometimes you need to think about, well, if you do have like the National Park Service managing their land, and Ogden Dunes managing their lands, and City of Gary managing their lands, how are we going to get them all on the same page? Well, that's an actual project we're working on right now, sitting down with those different entities and talking about the access agreements that it's going to take, which, yes, it sounds like it should be something easy to allow the federal government to walk off of their property or somebody to walk on the federal government's land. Not always, lots of paperwork. We're going to break down that barrier. We're going to help get the communication going. We're going to bring people to be engaged that want to get out and help add to the capacity and understand why they need to be there. And these are Steel City Academy kids from Gary that were out there doing this hands-on stewardship and moving from Ogden Dunes lands to City of Gary lands to National Park lands. Something that it gets difficult. These boundaries sometimes stop good work from happening. And we are committed to erasing those as best we can. The Great Marsh. One of the projects here, we recognize how sensitive this is, and it just so happens to fall between land managers such as Shirley Hines Land Trust, the National Park Service, and the state park. Again, those icky boundaries getting in the way. We're so thankful for each one of these organizations, but sometimes, especially the state and the state can't go on the federal lands, and the federal lands can't go work on the state lands. So what can we do to erase those boundaries? And what can we do to work most efficiently? Well, in this case, the thing that they said we need is, well, if you can get us a giant piece of equipment that can go to all of these lands and that we can share for cooperative management, that's going to help us. And so Save the Dunes purchased a Marsh Master, or Marsh Monster, as some people call it. This amphibian machine is able to do the work of 15 laborers and can go across wetlands with such little pressure as far as how it is made that it's not harming the plant species that are there. Can go over the top of critical species without harming them. They can then target any kind of spraying that they need to do from up top. And it's just very fascinating how that all works. Sometimes you just need the equipment. And so that was one of the projects that through the Indiana Dunes Ecosystem Alliance of saying, well, what do you need? We know we need to erase boundaries. We know we need other people to help work on these areas. Well, we also need the equipment to do it. Okay, let us get you those things. Let's see what we can do. Yeah, it's a pretty neat thing. Oh. Park Service is pretty happy they have it too. And then of course, again, the hands-on people, that capacity. Well, my goodness, sometimes you can't get the federal people coming on the state lands or the Shirley Hines lands or vice versa. Well, let's get a cooperative agreement with the Student Conservation Association to get more workers out there. And wouldn't you know, the people who stepped up to the plate that we were able to fund was an all-women Student Conservation Association crew. Again, there's that theme of women in the dunes and doing some really magical stuff. And we're going to be having them out this year as well. And they're going to do a lot of invasive species removal. Just like that Marsh Master, they're going to be doing it in tandem with that and really just looking at the whole Great Marsh as a giant vision. I tell you, that is going to be a case study one day of just how multiple management's going on, giving the tools, giving the power to make sure that things such as Phragmites don't just wipe it out. Now, something I haven't mentioned, I think I snuck it in there, climate change. And it's something that, yes, we have to be talking about. Because already our growing season is 1 month longer. We have had 33 to 45 more days above 90 degrees.
Then what? And when?
They're doing a range of, let's see, they've done this within, I think, looking at the last 3 years. This just came out at the end of last year. A product of working with wonderful partners from the Field Museum and the Department of Natural Resources. We were able to secure funding to actually help the Field Museum hire a climatologist. She's fabulous, and she did a lot of these studies. 24 to 36 fewer days of snow cover. She's actually somebody I would recommend that if there's ever another Calumet Revisited speaker that you need, Catherine Moore-Powell is your gal, and she can elaborate on this. Now we're in this position where we need to take this. We need to take this whole plan and start integrating it into other management styles. It's not going to be easy, but that's what we're committed to doing. 2019 is going to be a year of looking at how the dunes are managed so that we can start managing them in a way and bracing ourselves for climate change. Things that came out in this report were things such as the Carter blue butterfly, someone finally saying that it is extirpated from this area. And that hadn't been quite fully said yet. I think everybody's been hanging on to hope. And while they're not going to have it federally listed as so, because supposedly when you do that, it's much more difficult to bring it off of that list than if you somehow get a good year and we're able to reintroduce the population. But we're starting to think about that. We don't want that to become the species face of bad things to happen, the loss of some of these other wonderful things. So I'm going to pass this around if you're interested in that. But oh yes, climate change, very much. It's something that is a huge need to all land and water managers. And we're working to find, again, convening the right people, the experts, to get this good information out there. I mentioned about getting people on the water. And again, this is another view of the East Branch of the Little Calumet River. If you can get people on the water and enjoying it, such as the children at the Dunes Learning Center, then maybe, just maybe, you're building the next generation that's going to come out and protect these areas too. So yes, Save the Dunes is working on some of those projects of getting the waterways open, taking care of some of the invasive species, and they're pointing at invasive species, around the area so that there's good riparian habitat, and putting in different kayak rest stations and launches that allow people of all abilities to use the water. Of course, there's protecting biodiversity. And what would we be if we weren't getting people to do the work in their own backyard? Save the Dunes created the popular Living in the Dunes guide. We had over 5,000 of these printed, and they were gone within a series of months. We are having more of them printed right now. But this has become one of the first really localized guides, very local, very layman's terms for people who just want to say, well, what is this plant in my backyard? Well, that's burning bush? Well, I see that that's bad. Why don't I pick something native? And okay, here's a cool alternative. Bottle brush grass. Which honestly, I need to look at that one myself. I haven't heard of that one. But it's a fantastic resource and something that you can also find online. So if you're really interested in any of these things that you're sneak peeking at, I've got cards up here. savedunes.org/resources. This is where you're going to find this information electronically today. And we can pass that around too as well. People can start right in their own backyard just by not perpetuating the invasive species and making sure that we're choosing the ones that are really going to thrive and live in harmony with what we have here. And I'll be honest, right there at the end of fall, I took out the 2 Bradford pears that were in my backyard. It felt good. And now I just need to decide what to put there. So I'll take suggestions.
I have an idea.
That's what I
Berry.
Okay. I'm so excited, and come spring, I'm going to be a kid in a candy store at some of these places. So sometimes reaching out to other people in ways such as the art community has been projects that we've taken on. We worked with an artist who helped commission these paintings for us, and they're inspired by native species that are drawn here to the Indiana Dunes. So sometimes we might educate on, here are the plants that you need to plant in your garden in order to either A, not promote invasive species, or B, get butterflies and bees and things like that. Other times our presentations might be, you enjoy this beautiful art, think about the colors that you appreciate in nature. What could your canvas be? Now, don't you want to protect that? In other ways, there are so many different ways to talk to different audiences, and we try to do that, to engage people in ways that maybe they haven't thought about thinking about the dunes because they just haven't connected it with the things that are important in their lives. Another project, protecting our shoreline. From who? From us. Look at all these trails. Is it really necessary that we have every single trail there? And the answer is no. We can consolidate. We can literally save our dunes by not stepping on them. And so we are working with Michigan City. We're also actually working with the city of Gary now as well, and the Park Service, because when people go to the park, they're seeing signs like this, and they're like, okay, I'm in a national park, and all right, I have to abide by the signs. I can't go off the trails. Now, how do you take that mentality and put it in the context of your neighborhood? Of those resources right out of your back door are equally important and worth protecting too. And so that's something that we are working on, a project that's going to be very big in 2019 as well. We're getting on to advocacy, and you better believe that when the hexavalent chromium spill happened in April, we were a voice. In fact, there was a discharge just recently in December that happened. It wasn't hexavalent chromium, it was some kind of foamy additive. And we were actually the first ones on site calling the park and calling IDEM and saying, hey, this is what's happening. So sometimes we are literally the physical watchdogs that are patrolling and making sure that these things aren't happening. When the consent decree came out to try to settle this whole debacle, people looked at this giant piece of paper and said, what is this? How can I make an informed comment that really means something? And so we work to help educate people, because so many people are concerned about things like this, what's in our water, especially Portage Lakefront and Riverwalk. That's got the drinking water intakes right there too. And so we helped people with comment letters, suggestions that people could take and integrate into their own words. And I find us in a place that if that situation arises again, we'll be there to do that. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. Industry is not our enemy. We consider them a good partner, and there's a lot of good things out there that they do. Sometimes there may be corners cut, and we have to be there to put that in check and make sure. And other times, like I said, bad things happen, but the public has to be informed and part of the response to make sure that accountability happens and that we're moving forward from the situation. We are still engaged in a battle for who owns the beach. Still. If you are familiar with the long-lasting battle that I forget how many years ago now it started, about whether or not the residents who live along the beach own down to the water, that was resolved at the beginning of last year, where the Indiana Supreme Court said no, that land from the natural ordinary high water mark, which is essentially where the vegetation starts, roughly, down into the water, that's ours. That's ours. It belongs to us. And yet, there is a group of people that have filed with the United States Supreme Court, and we're just waiting to see what happens. We should know in the spring whether or not the court will be hearing it, but that's something that Save the Dunes, Alliance for the Great Lakes, the Bloomington Law Center out of, for Indiana, and then also the Long Beach Community Alliance, we're not stepping back. It's a fight that we're going to see to the end, because we really and truly do believe that this belongs to the people. And of course, Saving the dunes and protecting the environment and enjoying all these resources means nothing if you can't get to it. So, you'll see that continue. Look for it in the papers. Another project, of course, is our advocacy in DC. We are often going out and being Indiana's lead voice for what needs to stay in the federal budget, what needs to happen as far as the Asian carp, things like that. Basically, what Indiana can do to position themselves as a better Great Lakes state. And sometimes our representatives and senators, not all, mind you, sometimes there just needs to be a little gentle reminding that, hey, Indiana, you do have a fantastic thing up north. Don't forget about it. One of the topics that it seems like we're always talking about when we go to DC or when we're talking with, why keep things in the federal budget, like some of these restoration initiatives, like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, for instance. Well, the Grand Calumet River, before and after, that's a river. That's the river around here. A river that everyone said was going to be hopeless. There was nothing that was going to save that river. And yet we know that there are so many good organizations out there making a difference. They're out there taking out the contamination, the legacy contamination. They're using funds like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to remove the invasive species and turn this back to a river where U.S. Fish and Wildlife has said that they're starting to see fish species come back there that they haven't seen in decades. And that's incredible. So, of course, Save the Dunes, we are proud to tell that story. We want people to keep that funding there because we know the good that it can do. And so, what about all of you? What do we do? What do we do to save the dunes? Well, for one, you can join our organization. We think about all the people that have supported us, have stood by our sides during Dorothy Buell's time. We still need that kind of support today for people to ensure financially that the organization keeps going, but to also participate in calling your congressional leader when something comes up, to talk to your neighbors about being part of the advocacy solution and commenting on important letters or legislation, to engage in workshops and events, to learn something new, to volunteer with us. We always need some kind of help. Maybe it's outside, maybe it's inside in the office. But we're a small but mighty staff of 5. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. And so I encourage you, of course, to sign up for our e-news. And that is something that, I can send around a piece of paper or, perhaps sharing this list. I think we can talk about that of what the easiest way is, but I would love that you get our communication to see the latest that's coming from us and when the next events are. And of course, following us on Facebook is always an option. Save the Dunes, we are dedicated to protecting these places. I mean, it is something special. The lands and waters here goes back to that mosaic that I was talking about of wetlands and beaches and pans and prairies. And I know even if we had a choice right now, I think these are some places that I'd rather be than inside. So, proud of our work, yes we are. Proud to do it hand in hand with some many wonderful organizations in the environment, yes we are. And proud to do it with and for people like you, because this is what makes living here so special. With that, that's the end of my official presentation, and I am happy to take any questions.
I have a question. What exactly does the Marsh Master do?
So the Marsh Master is, it looks like a tank, you saw it. The way that its wheels are, and what makes it so special, is that it actually, this pressure per square inch, it can roll over. So basically, if you think about people with backpack sprayers, which is normally how people are treating things, spraying the invasive plants with some kind of killing agents, this can maneuver in areas where people may not have been able to go.
Doing what? What's the purpose?
Drive it, you've got people up there spraying.
Like Phragmites, for
Like
example.
Phragmites, like hybrid cattails, which are another bad one.
Oh.
But if you think about just, there's so many dips and places that honestly, if you sent somebody out with a backpack sprayer to try to get and kill all these, you can't cover that much ground. This allows it to sensitively move in a way you can cover more area and not actually worry about smashing the good plants. It's really quite unique how that works. And a very effective tank. Yes.
Millie, can you give the artist name for the artwork?
Melissa Washburn. That's Washburn. She is fabulous. Someone who actually stayed in the Calumet residency in the Gary's Miller neighborhood.
Yeah.
She stayed there, was inspired by what she saw. That house is on top of a dune, and painted and drew a lot of that. I think they're hand drawings, but yeah, she did it all there.
Thank you. That's incredible.
Anything else?
Well, just a real quick question. The Phragmite issue is, dominant. Is there anyone who could spend enough time to figure out how you could put it to productive use?
This is going to sound so crude, but they did find out that they can make some kind of drug out of it. And it was like, oh my. And not the good kind of drug.
Flat, you could thatch your roofs with it. That's what's used for in Europe, but I don't think we're going to have thatch roofs.
Well, who knows?
That's what people talk about it, and honestly, it's so difficult to get to. I mean, like, it's got a root system, a rhizome system that's like spreading its fingers out all across the ground.
Yeah, plus
So-
the seed head that goes on forever. A million seeds from each plant of it, I swear. Oh my God.
So that's what you think about even trying to remove it. You could even risk spreading the seeds further.
Yeah.
You could, if you're not thinking about how to amend the soil afterwards, either you've got to get all the rhizomes out or not. I mean, it's something that should be talked about, but something that also at this point we've got to act and just get rid of it first and foremost.
And they are all over.
Yes, they
All
are.
over. Just when I look at those seed heads, I think it's hopeless.
I look back and I think of the Grand Calumet River and what they're doing there, because that photo, a lot of it is Phragmites. Yeah. It's a different time of the season, but I mean, it's a lot of it that covers is the Phragmites, and so
That's
this shows that it can be.
It's Roxana Marsh, isn't it?
This one I think is just before Roxana Marsh, but Roxana Marsh is another example that.
I think it's east, a little bit east of Buckeye.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think what they did is they had sprayers from boats.
Yep.
Didn't they? And not from the Marshmaster, but from boats, I think. But it's a beautiful area, and I was out there, and all the Phragmites, were gone, except if you look far enough away, there was this big field of Phragmites, but
I know.
but it was. But I think they did that mostly with the boat, the spray.
And all
It's great. I think I know where that is.
And I think you're right. It's just to the east. Roxana Marsh is another place, though, that it looked like it was just a stand of Phragmites. You couldn't tell that there was this beautiful bend that was known for its birding for hundreds of years, and then, yeah.
I heard, and I don't know if there was any truth to it, that Phragmites can be managed a little bit by water levels, or no, that higher water levels will tend to discourage them. I don't know if that's true.
That I'm not too sure, because they love water. I mean, in the sense of that's where you're going to find them. And I'm trying to think of like how much flooding does Northwest Indiana get? That'd be a good question for a land manager specifically.
Yeah.
I know with Phragmites, though, treatment such as fire, they love fire, so they can't use it. Like it's just like it just keeps coming back.
And they love salt,
Yeah.
road salt, so
Nearly indestructible.
it's very difficult.
Quite incredible.
Where did they come from?
Europe,
I think, yeah.
I'm pretty
Europe
sure it's
and-
Europe.
A lot of them came in when the water regimes were messed up in some of the parks and up and down, because then if the cattails are there strong, they usually take over. But you mess the cattail up and they'll beat them before they come back. That's the trouble.
But it's an
That's the
ornamental,
water
isn't
level
it? Didn't it come in as an ornamental?
Here, yeah,
Yeah.
Europe is it's thatch roof. That's really like the thatch roof stuff.
Because I mean, I've seen it in corporate landscaping and stuff. I'm assuming that's kind of maybe where it started.
Yeah, they're brought in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the corporate landscaping things still happen. I mean, heck, Bradford Pear right there. You watch,
Loose stripes.
yeah, and purple loosestrife and things like that. Just the whole area.
This was
Unfortunately, some
something
of
that
them
I
are pretty.
wondered about because
Mhm.
it was basically it was supposed to be like a nature preserve, or sort of like between a garden and a nature preserve, a natural area, and they had that invasive. It's a kind of a water lily. I don't know what it is, but they had the Nature Conservancy tells you what the invasive plants are. They do that in their little publication.
Yeah.
And it was growing, and it was right next to a creek. And I can't believe that the people would have done it if they'd known better.
Yeah.
But do you encounter a lot of those issues where maybe if you just go in and say, hey, maybe you want to do something different, or
You know, it's funny. This is not an invasive. Well, it's kind of an invasive thing. It was a unique situation. I was at the Long Beach Town Council meeting, which, by the way, I've never been to one of those where they're not yelling at each other. And I was kind of the enemy that night. I mean, there were some people that were very adamant about, we love our beach, we own it, we want everybody to be here. And then there was a great number of people saying, this is ours. And the one woman was listening to the presentation about how, not bulldozing dunes, things like that, because we've seen a lot of social trails where suddenly people are just now bulldozing the dunes flat in that area. And this woman came up to me afterwards and she's like, I'm the bad guy. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I've been for the last 30 years bulldozing the dune down, hiring somebody to bulldoze the entire set of 3 dunes. Like she owns a massive white property because I wanted to have a bigger beach, and also because some of the bad species of plants kept popping up, and I thought I was doing good by getting rid of them. And she's like, you're telling me that I shouldn't do that anymore? I'm like, no, please don't. But it was a really thoughtful discussion about, no, that's really not the right way. There's some better management techniques that we can talk about and do things differently, and I think you'll be a lot happier. And we'll see where that goes. But it happens that those conversations still come up. People don't know. Their heart's in it, but they just need the tools.
Some people want to be able to see the lake from their patio,
Yeah.
which is ground level, and you have a dune growing in between you and the lake, which happened a lot in the 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
In other states where they have dunes, like South Carolina, right there, they have built walks from property.
Mm-hmm.
You walk on this wooden bridge or whatever it is, all the way. If it's half a mile or more, you still walk it. You don't step on the dunes.
We've been talking with Michigan City. We're going to see some of their parks do some things like that. Probably won't be wood, like they're looking at from an advantage point of like fire, things like that, but still putting some kind of something that people can walk. And then also accessibility, because we want to be we want to be inclusive. Well, I hope I did a good presentation and good justification to the history here, because as I started out with, I'm young, it means I have a lot to learn. But I've got a lot of cool people, a lot of amazing people that have inspired me, and I'm excited to get to know more people. The longer I stay here, the more I work in this field to bring those wonderful things to bettering these lands and waters. So, thanks again.
Thank you for being here. I just want to say a few things. If anyone is interested in signing up to be informed when Over the Line is finally published, you can sign up here. And then when it is published, I can just email people and let them know that. We also have the agenda activities for the Winter Festival, which includes the Swan Die-Off discussion. And I just want to point that out. And next forum will be on Tuesday, February 5th, and that will be filling the gap for the Underground Railroad. So, any questions? Well, I thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you next month.